Snow was falling hard over the ridges of Cherokee territory, the kind that swallows sound and light until even the wind seems to whisper an apology. A lone rider moved through it, a tall Cherokee man, broad-shouldered beneath a worn buffalo hide coat. His horse exhaled steam with every breath, its hooves sinking into white silence. They called him Eli Blackbird in the towns. To his people, he was Ayoka's widower, the man who buried his wife by the cedar trees and never took another. But that winter he rode again, not for war, not for trade, but for something else entirely. He found her outside the trading post on the edge of Fort Smith. A young woman sat hunched near the fence, wrapped in a torn blanket that might have once been white. Her hair clung wet to her cheeks, her lips cracked. She looked up when she heard the hooves stop. For a moment, Eli thought she was no more than a ghost wandering between worlds, pale, trembling, with eyes that had forgotten what warmth meant. Someone sold her, the storekeeper muttered behind the door, voice thick with whiskey. Her family said she can't bear children. Sent her off like cattle. Eli didn't speak. His gaze stayed fixed on the woman. Her hands were shaking too bad to tie her own shawl. She tried to hide the shame in her eyes, but shame has a way of staining deeper than dirt. Go on, mister, the storekeeper said. Ain't your concern. She's been rejected twice already. Nobody wants a barren wife. Eli dismounted slowly, boots crunching through the ice. The woman looked up again, startled. Please, she whispered. Her voice was the sound of something that had been broken too long. I'll work. I can clean, sew, anything. Just don't. He raised a hand gently, stopping her words. For a long time neither spoke. Behind them, the trading post lantern swayed in the wind, its light flickering across his scarred face. A man who had buried love, seen war and carried the weight of both silence and memory. Finally, he said quietly, What's your name? Lydia, she said after a pause. Lydia Hart, he nodded once. You got anyone left? She shook her head. My father's dead. My brothers sold me. I guess that's the same thing. A breath of wind cut between them, carrying the scent of cedar and smoke. Eli studied her, not with pity, but with something older. Recognition, maybe. The same kind of hurt he'd seen in the eyes of widows after the trail. The kind that can't be prayed away. Come, he said finally. You'll freeze here, she hesitated. Why would you help me? He looked past her to the horizon, where the snow was swallowing the last light of day. Because once someone found me in the cold, he said. And they didn't ask why. He offered his hand. She stared at it for a long moment before taking it, her fingers thin and trembling in his palm. He led her toward his horse, wrapped her in his own blanket, and helped her onto the saddle. The storekeeper watched from the doorway, spitting into the snow. You'll regret it, Cherokee, he called. That one's cursed. Can't give a man his line. Eli didn't look back. Then maybe I don't need a line, he said. Maybe I just need peace. The horse started forward through the dark, snow falling thicker now, muting the world into a hush. Lydia clung to him, too weak to speak. Hours later, when they reached his homesteading, a quiet cabin tucked beside a half-frozen creek, she saw the signs of a life once shared. A second chair by the fire, a woman's comb left on the shelf, a child's toy that had never been used. He noticed her eyes fall on it. She died before we could have one, he said softly. Lydia's throat tightened. I'm sorry, he only nodded, lighting the fire. Don't be. Some things the earth decides for us. She sat near the flames, watching him move, steady, slow, kind in ways she didn't understand. After a long silence, she whispered, You don't even know me. Eli poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. His voice was quiet, almost a murmur. I know the look of someone the world has given up on. Outside, the storm howled against the cabin, but inside there was the soft crackle of fire, the kind that warms not the body first, but the soul. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both felt it, that strange pull between two broken things, finding a reason to breathe again. But out there, past the ridges, rumors were already stirring, the kind that could burn even a winter's peace to ash. And when morning came, the world would not stay quiet for long. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world frozen and still. Smoke drifted from Eli Blackbird's chimney, thin and gray against the pale sky. Inside, the fire had burned low, but the cabin was warm enough for the first time in months. Lydia woke to the smell of coffee and the soft scrape of metal against wood. Eli was sharpening a knife at the table, his movements slow, steady, deliberate, like a man who didn't waste words or effort. She watched him for a moment before sitting up. "I'll earn my keep," she said quietly. "You don't have to feed me for nothing." Eli didn't look up, didn't ask for anything in return. "That's what scares me," she murmured. He stopped, glanced toward her, not sharply, just long enough that she felt the weight of his eyes. "I don't keep what doesn't want to stay. You're free to leave when the roads thaw." Lydia nodded, though she didn't know where she'd go. The world beyond that creek had already decided what she was worth. He stood, poured her a cup of coffee, and set it on the table. "You'll need strength. Storms'll come again." They spent the day in quiet rhythm, she mending torn blankets, he hauling firewood and repairing the roof shingles that the snow had bowed down. She hummed once out of habit more than courage, and he paused to listen. "Used to sing?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Used to dream." Something in that answer stayed with him. By evening she'd swept the cabin clean, cooked what little cornmeal was left, and folded his late wife's shawl without being told. Eli didn't say thank you, but when he set another log on the fire, his hands moved softer than before. Then came the knock. Hard, deliberate, and unwelcoming. Eli opened the door to find two men from town, faces red from whiskey and cold. One was the traitor, the other a deputy, not the kind that wore a badge with honor, but the kind who liked to use it. The deputy grinned, eyes sliding toward Lydia. "Heard you took in a woman, Blackbird." Eli's jaw tightened. "I took in a person." The traitor spat in the snow. "That woman's been sold 3 times. Her family signed her off as barren, cursed. You think you can just keep her out here? Folks don't like that." "She's not property," Eli said. His voice didn't rise, but there was something in it that made the air feel heavier. The deputy shifted his weight. "You're Cherokee. You know how it goes, boundaries, bloodlines. Don't make things worse for yourself." Eli looked past them, to the snow-bright forest beyond. His hand stayed on the doorframe, steady, unflinching. "I buried a wife once," he said. "Don't plan on burying what's left of my peace." The traitor stepped closer. "You keep her and people will talk. Preacher says she's marked, maybe by the Lord, maybe by sin. Either way, she don't belong with decent folk." Behind him, Lydia stood quietly, clutching the edge of her shawl. The way they stared at her, like she was something shameful, made her shrink back toward the wall. Eli saw it, and that was when his decision formed. Clear as a sunrise over the plains, he stepped outside, letting the cold bite through his coat. "If any man comes to claim her," he said, voice low and certain, "they'll have to claim her from me." The deputy's smirk faded. "You talking about fighting the town, Blackbird?" Eli's eyes didn't waver. "No, I'm talking about protecting what's right." The traitor spat again, muttering, "Fool thing, risking your name for a barren woman." Eli's jaw worked, but he didn't respond. He closed the door behind them, the sound echoing like the end of a prayer. Inside, Lydia was trembling. "You shouldn't have said that," she whispered. "They'll come back. I know. Why would you risk that for me?" Eli looked at her then, really looked. "Because I know what it means to be cast aside by your own kind," he said. "And because peace isn't peace if it's bought by looking away." The silence that followed was long but not empty. She turned toward the fire, tears threatening. For the first time, she felt something different from shame. Not safety yet, but dignity. The kind she'd forgotten she still owned. Outside, hoofbeats faded into the distance, carrying the deputy's threats with them. But as the sun fell, the horizon glowed red, not from fire, but from the promise of what might come next. In towns like Fort Smith, words traveled faster than bullets. And by the next morning, everyone within 50 miles would know. The widowed Cherokee had taken in the barren woman and vowed to keep her, and peace in the hills of Cherokee territory was about to shatter. The next few days passed like the uneasy calm before a storm. Eli Blackbird kept to his chores, chopping wood, checking traps, feeding the horses, but the silence around the cabin had changed. It was no longer the peaceful kind. It was the kind that listens. Lydia could feel it too. Every night she'd glance toward the window before blowing out the lamp, half expecting to see a shadow watching from the tree line. The town's whispers had turned into something sharper, Rumor said Eli had gone mad with grief, that he was keeping a cursed woman under his roof. Others claimed he'd broken tribal law by taking in someone marked by shame. And shame, in those lands, was a dangerous thing to touch. One evening, as Eli stacked the last of the firewood, he heard a sound that made him pause. Not the cry of a coyote, but something heavier. Horses, 4 or 5 of them approaching slow. He set down the axe, walked toward the edge of the clearing. Through the trees, he could see lantern light bobbing like fireflies, voices low but tense. "Blackbird," a voice called out. "We know you're there." It was the deputy. Eli's stomach tightened, but his hand stayed steady as he stepped forward into the open. "I told you last time, this land's mine. You've got no reason to ride out here." The men dismounted, boots crunching in the snow. The deputy raised a hand. "No reason? You brought sin into this valley, Eli. Town's talking. Preacher says a woman like her brings death to the soil. Says the Lord already marked her barren, and now she's bound to mark you too." Eli's eyes narrowed. If the Lord marked her, then maybe he meant for someone to see her worth anyway. A murmur rippled through the group. The trader spat, his face hard. "Don't make this about mercy, Blackbird. We both know what this is. That woman ain't Cherokee, and she ain't white enough for town. She's nothing. You're risking everything for nothing." Lydia stood in the cabin doorway, shawl drawn tight, heart hammering. She wanted to speak, to tell them she didn't mean trouble, but the words froze in her throat. Eli saw her there, unfragile but unbroken, and something in him shifted. He took a slow breath, then said, "Then maybe it's time someone risked something for nothing." The deputy's smile faded. "Careful, Eli, don't forget who you are. The army may be gone, but the town still runs under white law. You start defying it, they'll take your land. They'll burn your house. You'll lose everything." Eli's gaze flicked toward the horizon where snow clouds gathered again like bruises. "Everything I loved's already been taken once," he said. "You can't steal what's already buried." The deputy's jaw tensed. He motioned to the others. "Then this is your warning. When the preacher rides up Sunday, you bring her to town. Let him decide her fate. If you don't, we'll come back." Eli didn't answer. He stood there until they turned their horses and vanished into the dark. Only then did he walk back inside, shutting the door softly behind him. Lydia was crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears streaking through the soot on her cheeks. "I told you," she whispered. "They'll come again. You should have let me go." Eli set his rifle against the wall and knelt by the fire. "And go where? Back to men who sell what they don't understand?" She shook her head. "I'm not worth all this." He looked at her then, really looked, and the answer came out quiet but firm. "That's not your choice to make anymore." The wind howled outside, pushing snow against the window. He rose and checked the rifle again, fingers tracing the old carving in the stock. A single cedar leaf, the mark of his late wife. By the time he looked back, Lydia had moved closer to the fire, her face lit in orange and gold. "Do you believe them?" she asked. He frowned. "About what?" "That I'm cursed." Eli didn't answer right away. He walked to the window, stared into the night where the riders had gone. "No," he said finally. "I think the only curse is how easy good men forget what mercy looks like." She exhaled, slow and shaking. For the first time since he'd found her, there was something different in her eyes, not fear but a flicker of trust. Outside, the woods had gone still again, but Eli could feel it, the coming storm, heavier than snow, thicker than any winter wind. He knew they'd return, maybe with a preacher, maybe with fire, and when they did, there'd be no law left but the one he made himself. Sunday came heavy and gray. The sky looked like it had been scraped raw, and the wind carried a strange, expectant stillness, the kind that makes even the crows stop calling. Eli woke early, chopping the last of the frozen wood, though his mind wasn't on the work. Each swing of the axe was slower than the one before, his eyes drifting now and then to the horizon, to the empty trail leading toward town. Lydia watched from the doorway, wrapped in his late wife's shawl. It hung too large on her, but it gave her a dignity she hadn't known she still possessed. "They'll come today, won't they?" she asked. Eli stopped mid-swing. A preacher don't ride through this kind of cold unless he means to make an example of someone. Her hands tightened around the fabric. Then let it be me. He turned toward her, the axe lowering to his side. You still don't understand. It's not you they want, Lydia, it's me, for standing where I shouldn't. She stepped forward, trembling but resolute. You could have let me go. You could have told them I left. Why didn't you? Eli looked away, the lines around his eyes deepening. Because I buried one woman I loved under this snow, he said quietly. I won't bury another who's done no wrong. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced a small, unsteady smile. You don't even know if I can love you back. He gave a faint shake of his head. I'm not asking you to. I just want you to see what mercy looks like when the world forgets it exists. Silence stretched between them. The fire crackled softly, the only sound that dared fill the room. Then from far off, the low rumble of hooves. Lydia's breath caught. Eli walked to the window. 5 riders this time, one in a black coat and wide-brimmed hat. The preacher, the rest with rifles slung across their backs. They mean to take me, she whispered. Eli turned to her, voice calm but certain. They'll talk first. Men like that always need to hear themselves before they sin. Moments later, the knock came. When he opened the door, the cold rushed in along with 5 men and the smell of wet leather and judgment. The preacher dismounted slowly, his beard stiff with frost. His eyes swept over Lydia, a look that didn't see a person, only proof. You've brought shame to this valley, Blackbird, the preacher said, voice sharp as a blade. You harbor a woman cursed by her own blood. The Lord's wrath will not spare you. Eli didn't flinch. And what does your Lord say of those who sell their daughters like cattle? The preacher's jaw tightened. She bears the mark of sin. The womb that refuses fruit is the Lord's punishment. Lydia stepped forward then, small, trembling, but no longer silent. Then why punish a man for showing me kindness? The preacher's gaze snapped to her. Silence. You speak against the word. Her voice grew stronger. No, I speak to it. Because I prayed for a child, and when none came, my family cursed me. They said I was less than a woman. But I still prayed, not for children anymore, but for someone to see me as more than a wound. The men shifted uneasily. Eli watched her, this fragile woman who'd once begged him not to help her, now standing like a flame against the cold. I don't need your pity, she continued, voice trembling but clear. And I don't need his land or his name. I just need to know there's still kindness left in this world, that it didn't die when you turned faith into fear. The preacher's hand trembled on his Bible. Blasphemy, he muttered. Eli stepped closer, eyes steady. No truth. A long silence fell. The wind howled outside the cabin walls, as if the land itself was listening. Finally, the preacher closed his book. Then you leave us no choice, he said, turning toward his men. We'll let God decide in his time. But if misfortune falls upon this land, it'll be on your head, Cherokee. Eli didn't answer. He stood in the doorway as they mounted their horses and rode off through the gray light, their shapes swallowed by the storm. Lydia stood beside him, shaking. They'll come again. Maybe, he said. Or maybe they'll remember what they saw today. She turned to him, her eyes red but alive. And what was that? He looked down at her, a small weary smile ghosting across his face. A woman brave enough to speak when I could not. She reached for his hand then, hesitating only a heartbeat before letting her fingers settle in his. His hand closed gently around hers in a quiet promise that didn't need words. Outside, the snow began again, soft and slow. But this time it didn't feel like the kind that buried things. It felt like the kind that covered them, to protect, not to hide. And somewhere deep in that silence, something in both of them began to thaw. By late March, the snow had begun to rot under the sun. The creek sang again, freed from its glassy chains, and the cabin roof shed its weight in steady, dripping tears. Eli sat on the porch, mending the reins of his mare. His hair, longer now, glinted faintly with silver, and the faint scar near his temple caught the light like an old memory refusing to fade. Inside, Lydia hummed a tune he didn't know, something soft, lilting, and heartbreakingly lonely. It had been weeks since the preacher's visit. No riders had returned, no threats, no warnings, only silence. Yet that silence carried its own kind of unease, like the hush after lightning but before thunder. When Lydia stepped out, she carried a folded blanket. She laid it across the rail beside him and said, "I thought you could use something new for the mare." He looked at it. Clean, sturdy stitching, careful handiwork. "You made this." She nodded, a shy flicker of pride in her eyes. He brushed his fingers across the seams. "You got a steady hand." "I used to sew for my sisters," she said quietly. "They'd tear their dresses before church, and I'd stay up nights fixing them. My father said it didn't matter. No man would marry a barren woman anyway." Eli's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. She continued, her voice light but trembling at the edges. "I used to think he was right, that I was born to take care of what others ruined. But since I came here, I feel like I've been mending something that was already torn in me." Eli looked up at her, really looked. The tiredness that once clung to her like dust had softened. Her eyes no longer looked past things, but at them. "Lydia," he said finally, "you've done more healing here than I ever have." She gave a small, uncertain smile. "Maybe we both did." The sound of the creek filled the pause that followed, a slow rhythm that matched the faint wind in the trees. Then Lydia's voice broke the stillness again. "Eli, when spring fully comes, do you mean to stay here?" He turned his gaze toward the horizon, to where the pines met the long blue sky. "I built this place for someone who never came back," he said. "Buried her when the fever took her. For a long time, this land just felt like penance. But now," he hesitated, the words catching, "now it feels like it could be home again." She swallowed hard. "Even with me here?" He smiled faintly, a glimmer of warmth in his weathered face. "Only because you're here." She looked down, hiding a blush that had no business in a life like hers. Then quietly, "Would she mind?" "Your wife?" Eli didn't answer for a while. The wind brushed across the porch like a whisper. "She'd be glad someone found me before the land did," he finally said. Lydia nodded, tears gathering in her lashes but not falling. "Then maybe I'll stay, until you want me gone." He set the reins aside, stood, and stepped closer. "You can stay as long as you want, Lydia. The only thing that's gone is winter." Her lips trembled in a quiet, grateful smile. She turned toward the hills where sunlight poured like honey across the ridges, melting away the last of the white. Then from somewhere down the trail, a sound, faint but unmistakable. Hooves. Eli's shoulders tensed. Lydia froze. The two of them stood silent as the noise drew nearer. Slow, deliberate, a single rider. When the figure appeared, it wasn't the preacher. It was a woman, middle-aged, wrapped in black, with a small wooden cross hanging from her neck. She stopped at the edge of the clearing, dismounted stiffly, and called out, "Are you Eli Blackbird?" Eli stepped forward. "I am." The woman nodded once, her expression unreadable. "My brother was the preacher. He took sick not long after that day he came here. Before he died, he told me. He said he'd judged a man and woman too harshly. Told me to bring this." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a folded paper, a deed stamped with the seal of the territory court. Eli took it, brow furrowing. "What is this?" "Land rights," she said. "Signed over by the preacher before he passed. Said he'd rather give grace than take it to his grave." Eli looked down at the document, speechless. Lydia covered her mouth, eyes wide. The woman mounted her horse again, pausing only to add, "He said one more thing, that mercy don't rot like pride does." Then she turned and rode off, her black veil fluttering in the wind. Eli stared after her for a long moment before turning to Lydia. She reached out, taking his hand slowly. "Maybe that's our sign," she whispered. He nodded, eyes soft with a peace he hadn't known in years. "Maybe it is." The last of the snow dripped from the cabin roof, falling into the thawed earth with soft, rhythmic taps. The air smelled of mud and pine, and in it, faint but clear, the scent of something new beginning. Lydia leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time the silence around them didn't feel heavy, it felt alive.